All right, guys, so we got our book. How many of y'all were able to read the introduction in chapter 1? I told you, it ain't many pages, was it? It was a pretty quick read. So Tozer is one where he doesn't waste a whole lot of words. He's very direct. He's to the point. All of his books are about this thickness right here, and boy, they're just chock full of stuff. Now, the first, the preface and the and the chapter 1, we had a debate Wednesday night if it was preface or preface, and everybody decided it was preface, and so we'll go with that. But the preface, it will take us, kind of introduce us to the idea, the general concept of the book. Chapter 1 is going to kind of give us the necessity for the book, and then from chapters 2 on out, it'll individually address attributes of God. So in that, he starts out, and the whole message, the whole idea is restoring a proper mentality to the church, for the attributes of God, the nature of God. So we'll actually read the preface, and then we'll hit some high points in chapter 1. It says, true religion confronts earth with heaven and begins and brings eternity to bear upon time. The messenger of Christ, though he speaks from God, must also, as the Quakers used to say, speak of the condition of his hearers. Otherwise, he will speak a language known only to himself. His message must be not only timeless, but timely. He must speak to his own generation. The message of this book does not grow out of these times, but is appropriate to them. It is called forth by a condition which has existed in the church for some years and is steadily growing worse. I refer to the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. The church has surrendered her once lofty concept of God and has substituted for it one so low, so ignoble, as to be utterly unworthy of thinking, worshiping men. This she has done not deliberately, but little by little and without her knowledge. And her very unawareness makes her situation all the more tragic. The low view of God, entertained almost universally among Christians, is the cause of 100 lesser evils everywhere among us. A whole new philosophy of the Christian life has resulted from this one basic error in our religious thinking. Let's look at the last sentence of that first paragraph there. The last sentence of the first paragraph, he says, he must speak to his own generation. Now, that's a concept that people have taken and kind of borrowed off of Tozer, and you see that echoed a lot in a lot of your progressive churches, that we have to mold to the time, that we have to do this. What he's saying there is that we may use new methods to communicate, but we use those new methods to communicate the old truth. So the same truth, just in new methods. So in that, Paul didn't have a YouTube page, and Jesus didn't run a Facebook, and they didn't have a one-call system and these things. So we can adopt new ways of doing things, but the original message has to stay the same. When we start tampering with the message is where we get into heresy and where we get into false doctrine and all manner of evil. And so what he's talking there, speaking to his own generation, is speaking to the generation in which he lives. It would be crazy for me to get up here and to rail against electricity, because, we all got electricity, right? That's kind of a foregone conclusion. Or talk about the evils of the combustion engine. And we needed to have wagons and horses. Well, that'd be silly for me. To another generation years ago, that might have been a relevant topic, but for us, it's just not. So we have to speak to the ills and to the evils of our generation, and we have to speak the ever-enduring message of that generation. So he says that the problem is that, in the second paragraph, is the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. People just don't have a right understanding of God anymore. They have a perverted view of God. And now, how did he say that this happened? How did that come? How did the church surrender its once lofty view of God? It says little by little. It did it little by little. It wasn't just that one day it decided to change its view of God, but rather little by little. And it says, without her knowledge. A lot of this happened without churches even knowing it was happening. The pulpit just kind of got weak. Some passages didn't get preached anymore. Things got pushed to the side. And so little by little, and without her knowledge, at the end of paragraph 2, it says, and her very unawareness makes her situation all the more tragic. The fact that this happened and the church didn't even realize that it had lost a proper view of God. It had lost a proper attitude towards God, a proper concept of God. And it didn't even realize that it did. Now that's sad. I mean, losing it's one thing, but not even knowing that you're losing it is a whole nother thing. It said the low view of God, paragraph 3, the low view of God entertained almost universally among Christians is the cause of 100 lesser evils everywhere among us. A whole new philosophy of the Christian life has resulted from this one basic error in our religious thinking. If you get God wrong, you got everything wrong. With our loss of the sense of majesty has come further loss of religious awe and consciousness of the divine presence. We have lost our spirit of worship and our ability to withdraw inwardly to meet God in adoring silence. Modern Christianity is simply not producing the kind of Christian who can appreciate or experience the life of the Spirit. The words, "Be still and know that I am God," mean next to nothing to the self-confident, bustling worshiper in the middle period of the 20th century. This loss of the concept of majesty has come just when the focus of religion are making dogmatic gains and the churches are more prosperous than at any time within the past several hundred years. But the alarming thing is that while our gains are mostly external, our losses are wholly internal. And since it is the quality of our religion that is affected by internal conditions, it may be that our supposed gains are but losses spread over a wider field. Let's make a definition real quick. How would you define religion? I'm sorry? A faith? Okay. All right. Well, faith is a thing. Faith is what? It's believing enough to base your behavior by it. And so religion is our actions required of us by God. So basically it's obedience. Our religion is based on how we obey our God. And so if we lose our religion, then basically we've just begun to disobey God. If we become non-religious, we just become disobedient. So it's not that we've necessarily left the ideas that we have of God, but rather we've just chosen not to follow God any longer. We've chosen to disobey Him and go our own way. And so he says that our religion, the quality of our religion, the quality of our obedience that is affected by internal conditions. Now he talks about that here over the past couple hundred years that the church is more prosperous than it's ever been. So we've got dramatic gains and we're more prosperous than at any time over the past several hundred years. He says, but our gains are mostly external, while our losses are wholly internal. What do you think he means by that? In what ways have we gained externally over the past few hundred years? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you look at the most of the New Testament churches, and while it said they gathered in a house, we think, oh, well, you got to have this big house for all these people to gather in. And most of them would have been no bigger than one of our Sunday school rooms and would have had 100 people in it. We can hold about 140 in our sanctuary here. And can you imagine all of us fitting into Rex's classroom? It'd be pretty tight, pretty cramped, wouldn't it? Now you understand why kids were falling out of windows and they were trying to tear the roof off. That was the size of most of the houses during that day, were about 600 to 800 square foot. And so, we've gained. I mean, man, we've got money to burn in the New Testament church, in the past couple hundred years. And we've built these cathedrals that are huge and beautiful and these amazing buildings. And we've got all the trinkets and toys and all the things that we could imagine. But what have we lost over the past couple hundred years? We've lost true faith, haven't we? I mean, we've got people, who will say, well, I would die for the faith, but they won't even come to church for the faith. I mean, they have this, rah-rah kind of spirit to them, but their obedience is next to nothing. We've got still today, by the time a child reaches 12 years old in a Muslim country, he's memorized the entire Quran. Most Christians today, sitting in the American pew, haven't even read their entire Bible once. So we've become very lackadaisical in our attitudes towards God. But as we've become more blessed, we've become lazy. As we become more blessed, we've become ignorant. And as we become blessed, we've moved away from true religion, and we've just started to chase after prosperity. I mean, that's why there's all those prosperity preachers on TV, is because they're making a lot of money doing that. I mean, people will send them $10 or $20 to get that hanky or get that new book or that DVD set or all that kind of stuff. I mean, they make a ton of money off of it. But the thing is that people are ever learning but never coming to the truth. And so while we've become extremely prosperous, what we've lost is actually, we've lost our identity of God. We've lost what God, who God is and what God does and what God requires of us. That's what the basis of religion is. He says, the only way to recoup our spiritual losses is to go back to the cause of them and make such corrections as the truth warrants. The decline of the knowledge of the holy has brought on our troubles. A rediscovery of the majesty of God will go a long way towards curing them. It is impossible to keep our moral practices sound and our inward attitudes right while our idea of God is erroneous and inadequate. If we bring back spiritual power to our lives, we must begin to think of God more nearly as He is. As my humble contribution to a better understanding of the majesty in heavens, I offer this reverent study of the attributes of God. We're Christians today reading such works as those by Augustine and Anselm. A book like this would have seemed to have no reason for being. In other words, there's some big old fat books that people just don't read anymore that deal with this topic exhaustively. This is a very condensed version, kind of a cliff notes, so that we would read it and digest it. He said, but such illuminated masters are known to modern Christians only by name. Publishers dutifully reprint their books, and in due time these appear on the shelves of our studies. But the whole trouble lies right there. They remain on the shelves. The current religious mood makes the reading of them virtually impossible even for educated Christians. Apparently, not many Christians will wade through hundreds of pages of heavily religious material requiring sustained concentration. Such books remind too many persons of the secular classes they were forced to read while they were in school, and they turn away from them with a feeling of discouragement. For that reason, an effort such as this may be without some beneficial effect. Since this book is neither esoteric nor technical, and since it is written in a language of worship with no pretense to elegant literary style. Perhaps some persons may be drawn to read it. While I believe that nothing will be found here contrary to sound Christian doctrine, I yet write not for professional theologians, but for plain persons whose hearts stir them up to seek after God Himself. It is my hope that this small book may contribute somewhat to the promotion of personal heart religion among us. And should a few persons, by reading it, be encouraged to begin the practice of reverent meditation on the being of God, that will more than repay the labor required to produce it. So, the trivial stuff is what sells in the Christian bookstore. We have the classics, and we still have access to more information than we've ever had before. But, instead of us going back and reading these classical works of Christendom, those famed authors that are read and studied, what do we go to, man? We go to whatever's on the front page, right there when you walk in of, Lifeway or Dove or some of these different ones, whatever's on display with the big pretty colors, that's the one that we go to. And it's the popular authors of the day that we end up buying and purchasing. It's the Beth Moores, it's the Stephen Furticks, it's the Tony Evans and that crew that we do. And Tony Evans is a pretty good preacher, but he's nothing compared to some of these theologians who suffered and died for the faith. And so we've ignored our martyrs, those who died penniless just for the advancement of God, those who came face to face with the Lord and had to live by faith. And today, man, we just read the most trivial junk that you ever saw. I told a few of y'all, probably about a year ago, Lindsay got a message from Max Lucado's office. Y'all know who Max Lucado is? Yeah. She got a message and said, hey, we want to send you Lucado's new book that isn't even published yet, and we want you to write a review. So we want you to read it and write a review. That's all we ask. And so Lindsay said, yeah, I'll do that. And so they sent her this book, and it was nice. I told her, I said, I ain't never been asked to review a book. That's crazy, And so they sent her this package, and you open the package, and boy, it smelled nice. It had some gourmet coffee in there, and a little book and a little bookmark and all, and had this pretty cover art on the book. And Lindsay said, well, I'll give it a shot. And so I think she made it about through the introduction and just said, the best thing I can do for Max Lucado is to throw this away and never tell anyone my real thoughts on this. It was just such trivial dribble, just nothing, just feel-goodism. And that's what we have today, is most of our big-name preachers, our big-name authors, they're either trying to push New Age philosophy, they're trying to preach psychology from the pulpit, they're using all of these secular devices to try to teach you about God. And so what most people have isn't even a Christianity anymore. They have a feel-goodism, they have a self-help, they have this New Age religion to where they get kind of spooky and not spiritual. We've lost truly who God is. So we go into chapter 1, and chapter 1 says, why we must think rightly about God. That's the chapter title. So from that title, we can assume that there's a possibility to think wrongly about God. So let's start there. All right. How are some ways that people think wrongly about God? Let's talk about culture. How does our culture, American culture, what are some things that American culture thinks wrongly about God? That's right. That's right. If you're a Christian, then you never suffer. You give your life to God and everything's nothing but blessings and mountaintops and lollipops, and you don't experience hard times if you're a Christian. Yeah, that's true. The only problem with that is Jesus, and all of the apostles were martyred, but they get away with that. They sell that. What's another way that our culture thinks of Christians? Name it, claim it. That's right. If you got faith, you can receive it. That's right. That's right. Absolutely. That name it, claim it stuff, that's in popular Christianity. What about our secular culture thinks that Christians are small-minded bigots? Yeah, and they think that Christians are anti-science. Hypocrites, yeah. Think about that. How funny is that? Christians are anti-science, but the Bible's been right about every scientific discovery. Science has continuously been wrong. That's what's funny about in modern day, where people worship this fictitious science, and they say, well, we're going to follow the science. The science keeps changing, doesn't it? You go just a few generations back, and they thought the earth was flat, and they thought that the whole universe revolved around the earth, and all of these sorts of things. They believed in that kind of stuff, and would just drain your blood, put leeches on you. That was medical advancement of the day. Boy, that was just the smartest thing ever. We see that science has been consistently wrong throughout history, but the Bible has always been consistently true. The Bible taught science before science caught up to it. So while the Bible's not a science textbook, we learn an awful lot of science from the Bible. It told us that the earth was a globe. It was formed in the palms of his hand. We see that there were rivers in the ocean before cartography was ever even a known thing. There, cartography was in Scripture. And so today they worship science and call us anti-science, and all we do is we say, well, we kind of know the one who created all of this. Science is just trying to explain what God created. And, it's in his own explanation is in his book, if you just have eyes to read it. Yeah, they call us hypocrites, and they'll say, well, those Christians, they're just as bad as any of the rest of us. Well, Christians are sinners, and we're progressing through our sinfulness. We're repenting of it daily. We're pursuing perfection. At least with Christians, we do pursue perfection. We make mistakes, but hopefully we don't ever make the same mistake twice. We're quick to repent, and we're always in the process of growing ever closer to God, being more conformed to the image of Christ. And so culture has a lot of lies to say about God. They'll even say, like, God is this angry God, and how can, God's an evil God. How could a good God ever let these bad things happen in the world today, as if God is the one doing them? An evil man goes in and commits evil, and they want to blame a good God because of an evil man. What are some ways that maybe denominations get God wrong, have wrong thoughts about God? I don't get us to gossiping. Well, I mean, like Brother Rex had pointed out, you got the name it, claim it, blab it, grab it. If you just got enough faith, you can do anything. We just pull down mountains and we could just have oceanfront property if we wanted to. If we had enough faith, we just pull that ocean right on up to the edge of our legal description, and we just have the beach. And if you get sick, well, then you just didn't have enough faith, or it's because there's sin in your life. You ever heard somebody say that? You get a sickness and they say, well, it's because you got sin in your life. You need to explore where you had sin. That's false and that's wrong. The Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jesus and the devil are brothers. Well, now, where do you get that from? That's foolishness. And so there's a lot of false ideas that are out there in the world today, whether it be in other denominations, whether it be in the lost world, the secular culture around us, or whether it even be in our own traditions. There's a lot of things that we grew up with that were just kind of folk sayings. There were wives' tales, and we just kind of grew up with them, and they're superstitious. How many of you, if you say something, if you say, you know what, I hadn't been pulled over by a cop in 10 years, what do? No. Knock on, Virgil said, yeah, you knock on wood, right? Oh, don't want to conjure that up. Don't put that evil on me, And so we'll knock on that wood, and that's silly, isn't it? How many of y'all eat black-eyed peas on New Year's Day? And collard greens? All y'all millionaires eating collard greens on New Year's Day. That's right. And you can't do no laundry, can you? Oh, you do laundry? Oh, man. Yep. How do you get rid of a mirror? You can't even get rid of a mirror. The only thing harder to get rid of a mirror in South Alabama is a toilet, or a trash can. You put a trash can by the road, and they can't figure it out. The trash man will come by and he'll go, well, there's no trash in this trash can. Why they put it out here? I don't understand. Y'all ever try to throw a trash can away? It's impossible. You can't do it. You've got to cut it up and put it in a bigger trash can to throw it away. And so but anyways, so there's just a lot of traditions that we grow up with that are just kind of silly, and we pervert the thoughts of God. We have that Southern voodoo about New Year's Day and all these different various things, and if we see something, if we see a yellow butterfly, then that means somebody's thinking about us, or all of these various things. And it's just Southern voodoo is all it is. It's a misconception about the true nature of God. And so he comes in, and in the third paragraph, he says, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Boy, I've got that underlined and starred and all kinds of stuff. Of course, most of this book is underlined. He writes so good that just about everything is underlined. But what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Think about that statement. Do you agree with that? How many of you agree with that statement? I would agree with that. That's a pretty profound statement. Before I married somebody, I think I'd want to know, well, what do you think about God? Before my daughter or my son marries somebody, I think I want to know, well, what does this person think about God? Maybe I want to know what their parents think about God. That's going to be a pretty important factor in my decision making. Your true identity of who you are comes down to what God you serve. And so we have to have a good idea of God, or else people will serve some pretty outlandish, weird things. So what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So now what if we had a wrong view of God? That'd mess us up pretty good, wouldn't it? That'd cripple us, that'd handicap us, that would slow us down. That would probably lead us into some of that folksy, voodoo and all kinds of tradition and weird stuff. It would impact how we go to work. It would impact where we work, impact, who we make friends with and the choices that we make, the decisions that we make on entertainment and friends and where we want to live. So if we get the God problem wrong, then we've just created a whole bunch of other problems, haven't we? He goes on and he says in the very next paragraph that the history of mankind will probably show that no people has ever risen above its religion. Wow. And man's spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. Wow. So every people group is limited to their view of God. So if they have an evil God, a hateful God, a vengeful God, if they have a greedy God, like the Baal worship of the Old Testament that has gone into the New Testament as well. It's very present in the world today. But Baal worship was all about more. And so they just gave to God to get stuff, right? So that kind of sounds like your prosperity gospel. They would offer up sacrifices to Baal, thinking that he provided rain and progress and increase. And so in that, they would offer up Baal just for the sake of increase. So they serve God, not for God, but they serve God to get more stuff. And so then if I got to step on you for me to get more stuff, then I might be doing God's will. If I got to take from you, if I got to hurt you, if I've got to, cut line and shortcut and all, then hey, that's just my God trying to bless me. And so no people has ever risen above its religion. Now you look across the world map and you can see that there's some places that started out poor and they still poor. And it's not that the people are less intelligent, and it's not that the people are less gifted or less skilled. It's not that the land is less rich or less fertile. What is it? It's that they serve a lesser God. That's it. Under the framework of Christianity, any people can prosper on the face of the planet. That's why they're lining up to get here. That's why they'll jump on a cooler in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and try to paddle their way to Florida. That's why they'll go across a desert getting raped as many as 30 times just to reach the border to live under a bridge under the Biden administration with a space blanket on. Why? Well, it's not because America just has so much money. It's because America has so much money because of the blessedness, because of the hand of God upon us. Now, if they knew how this culture really was and what the future of America stands to be, they may go back because the hand of God is quickly being removed from this nation. So we were prosperous and we did great things, and everywhere that Christianity has bloomed has absolutely flourished. And every place that Christianity has been absent or has come under severe persecution has declined and has been destitute for generations. So like I said, it's not due to skin pigmentation. It's not due to any other fact than the people's religion. So the history of mankind will show that no people has ever risen above its religion. And man's spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. Not all religions are the same. Not all cultures are the same. Some cultures are just better than others. He says, for this reason, the gravest question before the church is always God himself. And the most portentous fact about any man is not what he at any given time may say or do, but what is deep in the heart he conceives God to be like. Now, on that page 12, we go into the first, second, the third paragraph, and it's the second sentence. And he says, thought and speech are God's gifts to creatures made in his image. That's some of the Christ-likeness, some of the God-likeness that we're created in. We have the ability to think, and we have the ability to speak. All right? So at the very creation of man, he breathes his spirit into man, and man becomes another speaking spirit. So that's one of our likenesses. Is there any other, aside from Balaam's donkey, is there any other species on the planet that can speak? Not a one, is there? It's just us. So that's part of our nature, the godlike nature, but also not only is speech, but also thought is something that he gave us. Reason, cunning, being able to come together, being able to communicate. That's why at the Tower of Babel, what do you say? That anything that's devised in the heart of man, they'll be able to do it. If men began to come together in oneness of speech and began to share ideas across cultures and different experiences, as communication increases, what will increase? Wickedness will increase. Well, today, there's never been, since the Tower of Babel, there's never been a time upon this planet where the speed of thought was any faster. We used to, in business, when I was in retail, we had a lot of people who would come seasonally in for the for farms, to work on farms. And they'd come in, and boy, they wouldn't speak a lick of English. And over time, they learned that I had a working knowledge of Spanish. And so if they slowed down and talked one word at a time, I could figure out what they were trying to do, what they were trying to get to. They had a nickname for me. Y'all remember the nickname? Gordo Gringo. It means fat white boy. That's what it means. They come in the store, they say, "Hey, Gordo Gringo." I say, "Hey, all right, I know what you're saying." And so, I'd help them, and get it going. But after a while, I figured out, I said, what, there's got to be an app for this. I mean, we're in 2021. There has to be an app for this. And so, what, there is a Google Translate. You pull that booger up on there, and they talk into the phone, and it types it out in English. And then I can read exactly what they said, and then I say it to my phone, and it puts it back into Spanish. And they'll be able to communicate right back and forward, just like that. And all of a sudden, boy, we could move and shake, and we could do all kinds of stuff. So that thought and that speaking, it comes directly from the hand of God. And so in that, just like with the Tower of Babel, they come together, and what they do? They come together, and they had a great big revival meeting, and they just built a tower to God because they loved them so much, they wanted to go up there and hug them. No, what did they do? They took pride in amongst themselves, and they spit in the face of God. And they said, we're going to build something so great that not even the hand of God can prosper against us. If God tries to flood the earth again, we're just going to go up in the tower and laugh at him. And then God said, well, you're going to be laughing in a few dozen different languages. Scattered them all across the planet. Divided the tongue. So, he says, we may speak because God spoke, and in him, word and idea are indivisible. So what we say about God and the ideas that we have about God are the same. If we think he's holy and righteous, we'll speak holy and righteous things about him. If we think that he's neutered or a joke, then we'll have joking, neutered language towards our God. The first sentence in the bottom paragraph on 12, it says, a right conception of God is basic not only to systematic theology, but to practical Christian living as well. It is to worship what the foundation is to the temple. A right conception of God is basic not only to systematic theology, but to practical Christian living as well. He's saying you can't even get your Christian life right if you don't believe the right things about God. If you got a false idea about God, then it's not only just going to show up in the world of theology, but it'll actually show up in your marriage. It'll show up at your job. It'll show up in how you raise your children. It'll show up in your choices and in your friendships. It's going to echo throughout all of your life. Now, over on 13, it's going to tell us in the second paragraph, it says, all the problems of heaven and earth, though they were to confront us together and at once would be nothing compared with the overwhelming problem of God. And here we go. Number one, that he is. Number two, what he's like. And number three, what we as moral beings must do about him. All right. How many of y'all believe in God? Absolutely believe in it, right? If you didn't believe in God, that would change your whole day, wouldn't it? All of a sudden, you wouldn't worry about an afterlife or the consequences of your actions. You would just live for today. Nike, if it feels good, do it. All of that kind of stuff. And so we believe that God is. Now here is the big question. This is the second point. What he is like. What's God like? He's loving and compassionate. That's right. Absolutely. Okay. I didn't hear you. He's a jealous God. That's right. He's loving, he's compassionate, but he's also jealous. He's a good father. That's right. He's forgiving, quick to forgive. He chastens us. That's right. If he loves us, if he's a loving God, he's a chastening God. You can't be a good father without loving your child and without chastening them. That's right. So when you're wrong, God will spank that butt. He'll jerk that heart. He'll turn that head. He's all powerful. That's right. That's right. Who's going to challenge God? Who can stand toe-to-toe with God? Absolutely nobody can. That's one of the false things that we get a lot in our secular culture. Is our secular culture wants to treat the angelic conflict as if it's like God and the devil in this cosmic arm wrestling match, and we just don't know who's going to win. And so for all of eternity, they're going back and forth, and the devil's got them on the ropes, but maybe God can come back. And man, there ain't. This whole ordeal we're going through is just God rubbing the devil's face in it. That's all it is. In that moment, the very moment that there was sin found in the devil, God could have snapped his fingers or just thought the thought and could have just disintegrated the devil. Never see him again. God's just toying with him. The devil's a loser. He's already whooped, and God's just making fun of him. He's playing the old rope-a-dope like Muhammad Ali used to do. He'd get on the ropes, and he'd just let that guy beat on him. And that guy, the whole time, he thought he was doing something to Muhammad Ali, and all Ali was doing was letting that old boy get tired. He's just waiting him out, and then he'd knock him out. After he's done embarrassing him, then he'd finally do that knockout blow and move on. And that's all this is. The devil's an angel, and you know what? At the end of all time, God doesn't come down and struggle with the devil. He doesn't even send Jesus down here with a sword to take care of the devil. Who ends up chaining the devil up and throwing him in the pit? An angel. Doesn't even give that angel a name. Just an angel. That's our adversary. That's our accuser. An angel. Just one angel takes care of the devil at the end. So it's not a fight between God and the devil. So, that he is what he is like. And the third thing, what we as moral beings must do about God. That's our response to God. If we know that he exists, and if we know his true nature, well, then that leaves us with what is our response to God. It says, the man who comes to a right belief about God is relieved of 10,000 temporal problems. If you get God right, the rest of your life just seems to line up. If you got a proper view of God, then every other decision gets real easy. It's just made in an idea of what would God have me to do? What is it? What would be in the true nature of God in this situation? In the middle of that paragraph, in the middle of the third paragraph, it starts out and it says, that mighty burden is his obligation to God. It includes an instant and lifelong duty to love God with every power of mind and soul, to obey him perfectly, and to worship him acceptably. That's the first and second commandment, isn't it? That's the first and the greatest, and the second is likened to it. And that's also the first commandment of the 10 and the second commandment of the 10. Have no other gods before him. Have no idols. Worship the right God. Worship him the right way. It says, and when the man's laboring conscience tells him that he has done none of these things, but has from childhood been guilty of foul revolt against the majesty in heavens, the inner pressure of self-accusation may become too heavy to bear. The gospel can lift this destroying burden from the mind, give beauty for ashes and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. But unless the weight of the burden is felt, the gospel can mean nothing to the man. And until he sees a vision of God high and lifted up, there will be no woe and no burden. Low views of God destroy the gospel for all who hold them. See, before we ever go and preach the gospel, one of the terrible things that started is in the 70s, they came out with a seeker-friendly movement. And in that, they just wanted to fill churches. And they thought if we can just get them into church, then the Holy Spirit will work on them. And so they neutered down the gospel. And what they quit telling is they quit telling the bad news. See, the gospel is good news. And the thought was if we just leave out the bad news and focus on the good news, then we'll get a lot more people to come. But the problem is that all you ever tell people is the good news. They don't know how good the good news is. They take the good news for granted. So now, if I told you, if I said, you know what, here's the thing, is that the fire was put out. You go, hey, fire was put out. And you go, well, okay. I mean, that'd be your reaction, wouldn't it? It'd be, okay, what fire? You know, I mean, we'd just have that response. There would be no urgency. There'd be no real drive of it or curiosity. We'd treat it just as flippantly as the person who was telling us that the fire was put out. But if they said, you know what, we went to your house and it was fully engulfed in flames and your kids were inside and we were just real worried and boy, we couldn't, nothing was working right and we thought it was going to be a total loss. But you know what, at the last moment we came and we were able to get everybody out and we put the fire out and everything's going to be okay. There's just minimal damage. You go, oh, thank God. Oh, that's much different. If we don't know the bad news, we'll never appreciate the good news. And when we start with the good news, we tell people, well, Jesus loves you. I love me. I mean, that's lost man's thought process to himself. I love me too. What's not to love? He should love me. I mean, I love me. Everybody else, mama loves me. Everybody loves me. So why wouldn't God love me? We don't start with the bad news. There's a holy and righteous God, and you've offended him. From the very beginning of your life, you've revolted against him. You have lived in constant rebellion against God. You have served your nature, your flesh, your want to for every minute of your life. You have spit in the face of your Creator, and there's coming a judgment for that. And that judgment is for your sins have to be paid by your blood. And there's no other way, and you will spend an eternity in a sinner's hell, desperately, wickedly being punished apart from the presence of God for all eternity. Now, would you like to hear the good news? Now, all of a sudden, the ears are open. Now, all of a sudden, they want to hear something, and hold on now. Now I got a problem. Now I've created an issue. Now we need to hear something. See, we don't start with Jesus loves you. We got to start with the bad news before we can ever get to the good news. Or else, if we don't, all we're doing is we're cheapening the good news. We're jumping in. They didn't know there was a problem, and you're telling them there's a solution to a problem that they didn't see was a problem. We wonder why we've become, salvation ignorant, and we wonder how so many people can come into the church house and walk the aisle and take the preacher's hand and then walk out and live a life however they wanted to. It's because we started with the good news. We give a low view of God, and it destroys the gospel for all those who hold them. He says, but unless the weight of the burden is felt, the gospel can mean nothing to the man. Unless the weight of the burden is felt, the gospel can mean nothing to the man. The bottom of the page, it says, among the sins to which the human heart is prone, hardly any other is more hateful to God than idolatry. Idolatry is at the bottom of a libel on his character. The idolatrous heart assumes that God is other than he is, in itself a monstrous sin, and substitutes the true God for the one made after its own likeness. Always this God will conform to or the image of the one who created it, and will be base or pure, cruel or kind, according to the moral state of the mind from which it emerges. On page 14, we jump down, second paragraph, and about halfway down at the right-hand side, it starts a sentence that says, "The essence of idolatry is the entertainment of thoughts about God that are unworthy of Him. It begins in the mind and may be present where no overt act of worship has taken place." It says idolatry, you don't have to make a trinket. You don't have to make a little altar and carve out a little god and set them there and you put little donuts in his dish every morning. You don't have to do that for it to be idolatry. It said idolatry is just simply thinking thoughts about God that are not true. That's idolatry. And guess what? Just about any thought that we can think about God is going to be less than what God is, because we are finite and He is infinite. So people will say, well, I like to think of God as a father sitting on a throne with a long white beard, and man, that ain't God. Well, they'll say, well, I like to think of God as this, or I like to think of Jesus as, well, that's not God either. See, anything that we're capable of is going to be far less than what He truly is. I'm going to use this, and hopefully this won't discourage Judah, but Judah, he likes to draw pictures, and he's learning. His art's getting a lot better. And occasionally he'll draw a picture, and it'll be me and him, and we're hunting or something. You know what? That picture don't look a thing like me. Not a thing. That thing's always got bird legs and a big old nose and all. I mean, it don't look nothing like me. Sometimes you think, well, is that a mushroom or is that me? I can't even tell. But he's developing. And he's going through it, and he's getting better, and he's trying to express himself, and it really is. He's come a long way. We can actually tell what his drawings are now. But, anything that he would be able to come up with at his age and with his artistic ability is going to be far, far inferior to what God created. So he's not going to be able to describe the lungs in my body and how they work, or the circulatory system, or the central nervous system. And, even if he paints a pretty picture, he'll never be able to get the fullness of what Jonathan is on that paper. And the same with you. When you try to describe God, you're not even going to come close to God. He's unfathomable. He's so inconceivable to the human mind that anything that we can come up with is so far pale in comparison to what God truly is. That's why I always say, I believe, people say, well, when I get to heaven, I just can't wait to see old so-and-so that went before me and just run up and hug them and love on them. Or I can't wait to get to heaven and, kick Adam in the shin, or, the real Adam, not you. And so, all this, or see King David and, go through all this. Man, I believe for at least the first infinity, we're just going to sit and stare at the majesty of God. I think we're just going to be overtaken at His true nature, His true presence of who He really is. I don't think we're going to frolic in any meadows. I don't think we're going to fish in no crystal seas. I don't think we're even going to care about that banquet table. I think we're just going to stand in awe and amazement. Because, man, if we'll drive across the country to stare at a hole in the ground called the Grand Canyon, or if we'll drive for hours to go see snow on top of rocks at the mountains, or we'll just go and we'll go down to the beach and we'll just see, that old ocean roll in with nothing but dead snail houses and fish pee, and it just crashes upon the shore, and we go, oh, ain't it beautiful? And man, we just get so caught up in all of these things that are so meaningless, and they're awe-inspiring. And boy, we'll buy art and put it on the wall just to remember this thing that we saw, and it's nothing compared to the face of God. Absolutely nothing compared to the face of God. And in that moment, we'll see His face and we'll see His beauty. Judah's so cracked up. That's great. But we'll see His face and we'll see His beauty and His majesty. And in that, it will strike awe inside of us, and it will strike fear inside of us. We don't even know how to act. I think that'll take a few eternities to get over before we ever think about anybody else. I want to see my dad again. I think it'll probably be a few eternities before I even realize if he's standing beside me. It's just how I believe. He says the essence of idolatry is the entertainment of thoughts about God that are unworthy of Him. It begins in the mind and may present where no overt act of worship has taken place. The last page, number 15, very top. It says the heaviest obligation lying in the Christian church today is to purify and elevate her concept of God until it is once more worthy of Him and of her. In all her prayers and labors, this should have first place. We do the greatest service to the next generation of Christians by passing on to them, undimmed and undiminished, that noble concept of God, which we received from our Hebrew and Christian fathers of generation past. So we do the greatest service to the next generation of Christians, the people who are going to sit in these pews one day, the people who are going to sing in the choir one day, the people who are going to come in here and be deacons and pastors one day. We do our greatest service to them by passing on an undimmed and undiminished concept of God. That's the greatest thing we can ever leave them, that they can actually know God how He is, who He is. They can see Him for His true nature, His true holiness. That's the greatest thing we can ever do for them. It's not trips to Six Flags. It's not beach retreats. It's not snow retreats, in the winter. It's none of that kind of junk. No, the one thing is an undiminished view of the true nature and character of God. That's it. It says, O God of Bethel, by whose hand thy people still are fed, who through this weary pilgrimage hast all our fathers led, our vows, our prayers we now present before thy throne of grace. God of our fathers, be the God of our succeeding race. All right, guys, y'all got any questions or any thoughts that you'd like to share? All right. Nothing? I was just scared, overtaken? All right. All right, so next time y'all let's read chapters 2 and chapters 3 for next Sunday night. We'll go through it. How many of you enjoyed it so far? I think it's definitely worth it. So, like I said, this is one of the best books I think that you can read today. Anything with Tozer is wonderful. I think this is one of his absolute best. So with that, we'll dismiss. Brother Kenneth, will you dismiss us tonight?